Brenna Sniderman is the Executive Director of the Center for Integrated Research for Deloitte. She oversees a cross-industry research team focused on global shifts in technology, mobility, climate, and workforce, developing work that ultimately helps guide how organizations can operate and strategize in an age of rapid technology and cultural change. Hetal Parikh is co-founder and president of Rangam Consultants, an international workforce solutions company based in New Jersey that focuses on connecting people of all capabilities, including people with autism who are neurodivergent or with disabilities, to businesses looking to recruit and hire such talent. Dr. James Williams is the Interim Director of Career Advisement, Development, and Partnership at the Bovin Career Development Center at Beacon College in Leesburg, Florida. He also serves as CEO of Bloom Consulting in Round Rock, Texas, which provides vocational services, rehabilitation, training, evaluations, and counseling for people with learning differences, neurodiversities, and disabilities. Jilika Kumar is CEO and founder of Mintra, a neurodivergent-friendly talent platform that intelligently matches neurodiverse individuals with employers that value their strengths. In a day when diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, are corporate buzzwords, how rare is it that companies are still overlooking neurodiversity in their DEI programs?
I think that it is becoming more common that organizations do think about neurodiversity. We are hearing about a lot of organizations, Deloitte included, that have specific programs devoted to hiring neurodiverse candidates. That being said, I do think that it is one of the areas that is lagging when we think about DE&I for several reasons. One, I think neurodiversity is still a term that a lot of people don't know or understand. I also think that it is all too often what we consider an invisible disability, where it's not something you can necessarily tell just by looking at somebody. And it's all too often something that individuals don't necessarily feel comfortable disclosing when they are interviewing or applying for roles. And so it can be difficult to understand or know how to incorporate neurodiverse hiring goals into a DE&I program with all of those factors in place.
Thank you. Well, Hetal, what is preventing employers from hiring qualified neurodivergent candidates?
I think there's a couple of factors that are involved. First and foremost is the unknowns, the uncertainties, not knowing what they're getting themselves into, just really looking for expert partners. So every organization is always looking to tap into this underrepresented talent community and incredible talent community, but they just don't know where to start. They're looking for someone in the industry who can really help them, be that guide to them, help provide them with that necessary guidance, coaching. And then the other thing is also about failing, because if they're fearful of seeing that if they get into something that they fail, that it'll impact the future potential opportunities. So it's really critical, first of all, to ensure that you have the right partner that's going to help you to start the neurodiversity program. But so those are some of the factors that I would say. The other factor is also the recruiting methodology. Our current recruiting system essentially screens people out versus screening them in. And that is one of the biggest barriers to entry for this incredible talent community, to be able to identify what are some of the key strengths and their skills. And the third factor that I see is executive sponsorship. So while there are many individuals within the organizations who understand and see the value, they really need the top level executive sponsorship to help support, to be able to build a culture within the entire organization, so that when it's not a silo hire, but it's really a culture that is built in, that really demonstrates that we are truly about diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging, which expands the diversity into neurodiversity as well as disability. Because that's the other piece that I feel that oftentimes the word definition of diversity is not really expanding into that areas of disability and neurodiversity when they define diversity.
Thank you. Well, Dr. Williams, in the past, companies have hired neurodiverse job candidates kind of as a publicity boost or as charity. Are you seeing the motivation changing today?
I am. Of course, never fast enough, right, for all of us. But I am. I think that there is more of an emphasis on real, actionable change. And I think in the start of this movement of neurodiversity, and even if you look at disability in and employer roundtable and some of these great things that have been done, the emphasis was on small pilot programs, small efforts where we were going to see how it worked and then expand it. We were going to try with a couple of candidates and then, and what we're seeing now is much more of a comprehensive look at an entire organization, both large and small, of how they can be more inclusive in their hiring, more inclusive in their training and their supervision of employees. So yes, absolutely. Seeing a lot of growth there and a lot more action and a lot less talk, which is a great thing.
All right, well, thank you. Angelica, if the motivation is changing, let's get down to brass tacks. Why should companies even be interested in hiring neurodivergent candidates?
Yeah, well, neurodiversity is a neurological variation across the human brain. People who are wired differently and process information differently as well. And while those differences need to be understood and accommodated by companies, it also comes with people who think differently, people who think outside the box. And that means that there's increased innovation for companies who are looking for unique talent that they're trying to bring into their workforce to have that competitive edge. It also brings a whole lot of empathy for different human experiences across that wide range of abilities. So, neurodivergent employees that are being hired into companies are building products that are accessible and that represent the diversity of the human species. And then, of course, the statistics validate the facts. I mean, there's a higher retention rate. A recent stat shows neurodivergents are 30% more retained than neurotypical peers. And there's also higher levels of productivity that are, again, through studies have been demonstrated. So it's really exciting to see the reasons and the actual improvement that companies are benefiting from when they're hiring neurodivergents.
All right, thank you. So, Brenna, when companies do talk about neurodiversity, it seems a lot of time they focus on autistic job candidates because they have the pattern recognition abilities and they have basically an ability to stay on the job longer. But are other neurodiverse candidates, other differently able job candidates, as hotly coveted as autistic ones are?
Well, it's an interesting question. And first, I kind of want to back up for a minute and talk about that assumption that those on the autism spectrum tend to be better with understanding and looking at details and data, because you can't make a vast overgeneralization about any one population. And those on the autism spectrum are no different than any other neurotypical individual in that each person has their own talents, their own proclivities, their own things that they bring to the job. Some may be great at details. Some may be great at other things, like things that are a little bit more artistic or a little bit more sort of broader or squishier than simply details. So I want us to back away from that notion that there's only one type of skill that a person on the spectrum can bring to an organization. I also think that if we're looking at individuals that say have ADHD or have OCD or have apraxia or other types of language processing skills or other different types of challenges, I think there is a broader understanding of those particular diagnoses or conditions as well. And I think it comes down to a couple of things. One, organizations themselves are just getting smarter about understanding all of these various different types of diagnoses and differences out there. And the other, I think, is just a level of comfort that we're seeing, or a level of inclusiveness that we're seeing all the way down at the school level. So children now, there is much more of an emphasis on making sure that individuals with different diagnoses are included in the classroom, at least for a certain period of time, sometimes as much time as possible. And as we're seeing children grow up, go to high school, go to college, they are getting more accustomed to working with and partnering with people of different ways of processing and different ways of thinking. And I think that as we're seeing these individuals come into the workforce now, they are perhaps more open and more understanding about working with individuals with a broader range of ways of thinking and modes of thinking that are opening up not just to autism, but beyond autism as well.
All right. Well, Hetal, when the job process begins, when someone starts hunting for a job, what are some of the minefields that blow up the chances of neurodivergent candidates landing work?
I think it starts with education and training. Brenna really touched upon something critically important. Well, right now, as the new generation enters the workforce, they are more prone to be inclusive. They've been exposed, familiar. They've worked with, whether if they were in high school or in colleges. But there's vast range of generation right now that is in the workforce that is quite unfamiliar and are not really they don't always necessarily have the right abilities to be able to understand this talent community and talent pool. And so they're trained in the current recruiting model and structure in the system, they're trained to shortlist candidates. And when you're shortlisting candidates, number one, on a resume, you're going to find that some of the talent community doesn't always necessarily have the prior experience, but they certainly hold the capability. They certainly hold the skills. They certainly hold the passion. It's just a matter of time that they get the opportunity to develop that expertise, that experience on resume. But how do we as organizations identify those skills, especially in today's world when we're experiencing with great resignation and great opportunity? It becomes really critical and important to really revamp that recruiting model and methodology to not screen people out versus rather screen them in for their interest, for their passion, and for their capabilities. And I think part of the problem is really helping to not just build a culture, but training hiring managers. And then once they are hired, the other aspect of making sure that there is a natural support system that's built in within the organization so that individual does not feel uncomfortable, but rather they are included in all types of conversations, all types of engagements, and they are inclusive so they can flourish and be successful on their jobs.
All right, thank you. Well, Dr. Williams, kind of piggybacking on what Hetal just said, can conventional job interviews disadvantage neurodiverse candidates?
Absolutely, they can. And I think, in a lot of different ways. One of those is the questions we ask, of course, and that's what a lot of people consider is our current kind of thought process is we do a lot of behavioral interview questions, a lot of tell me about, explain, describe, and for some candidates, those are opportunities that are great for them because they can spin that yarn and provide a great story and provide a great answer. But for some of the other individuals we work with, they would be much better served by a more traditional show us what you know kind of approach. Show us those skills, show us some practical knowledge. You're just picking an example off the top of my head, coding, great. Show us how you code, for it. And versus saying, tell us about how you code or tell us about a story or tell us about a time. So I think it absolutely can. I don't want to overgeneralize. I think that's important too. Some candidates can do well with that traditional model, but I think one of the things that if we're really being focused on diversity and on reaching the entire neurodivergent pool, that we need to just make sure that our hiring process is just as diverse as neurodivergent. Excuse me.
Well, what about, let me follow up on that, Dr. Williams. What about these companies that have not fostered DEI into their corporate philosophy? I mean, are neurodivergent candidates basically going to strike out of these places, or do they need to say, hey, can we do it a different way?
Sure. Should they strike out of these places? No, but are they? Yes. And I tell people I have one of the jobs I've had the pleasure of doing the last 15 years is placing people with neurodivergence in various different jobs across industries. And there are some employers, and I'll be respectful and not say who, but there's some employers who we don't recommend our clients apply there. Not because we don't want them to work there, we would love that, but because that employer, frankly, just has barriers that we can't get through and we know they can't get through. And so I think, that is a big piece that we have to consider. Are there disability or neurodivergence friendly or neurodiversity friendly employers? Absolutely. What I hope for and what I love is organizations like Rangam, organizations like Mentra, hopefully not just from our side approaching those employers to try to change and start a conversation, but also coming from that other side of, hey, if the challenge you're struggling with is just the how, there's amazing people and amazing organizations out there that can help you figure out the how, but you have to be willing to take that step.
Thank you. So, Jillica, if I'm a neurodivergent job candidate, should I unmask my learning difference during the job process?
Honestly, unmasking is always a personal and contextual decision. And in the right environment, unmasking can result in improved outcomes for everyone involved. If you're, in the right environment, if the manager understands what your neurodiversity inclusion essentials are, then that individual can really exceed expectations, right? Because they're in an environment that fosters their differences. That being said, it is a challenge to find those employers that oftentimes do accommodate and value those neurodivergent strengths. And that's a large part of sort of the reframing that we're doing today. All of us here are, we recognize the strengths and those neuroexceptional potentials that this population brings into the workforce. And so the goal is, can we all create a system that really builds in the supports needed for the individual to thrive and understand, and then respect someone's decision to unmask, to share their neurodiversity, and be valued and as a member of the team and as a valued member of society as well.
Okay. Well, Brenna, let's say for sake of argument this morning that I'm a neurodivergent job candidate and someone has called me and said, hey, you got the job. What are some of the obstacles that I, as a neurodivergent employee, are going to face most likely on the job?
So I think there's a whole host of them, and I think there are many of the same challenges that any new employee would face at an organization a neurodivergent candidate would face, but perhaps a little bit more magnified. There is the challenge of understanding an unspoken culture at any organization, which is a challenge even in the best of times for anyone. But for those who have challenges picking up social cues or unspoken cues, that can be a particularly hard hump to overcome. The second that we've seen is really a lack of a network. In many organizations, and I know at Deloitte, we have networks for people who've gone to specific universities, who have specific backgrounds, specific DE&I ethnicities or backgrounds. To have a network within an organization of other neurodiverse individuals to connect with, to share tips with, is something that is also critically important. Obviously, mentorship is important, but I think it's a different type of mentorship, not just career mentorship, but also mentorship on, things you might want to think about in a specific meeting, specific background or information about a program or an individual that might help you better navigate that situation. So having a mentor that's a real partner to help you navigate the things that many neurodivergent individuals find challenging can create a comfortable atmosphere for individuals to feel like themselves. I think to get back to that unmasking conversation, I think we take for granted how important it is for somebody to be able to bring their whole authentic self to work every day and feel comfortable being who they are in the environment and organization where they work. So creating a culture that not only accepts or tolerates, but really embraces the differences of every individual on the team. I think that's up to managers and team leaders to be able to do on their team, not the organization as a whole, to really accept this is who you are and I'm going to meet you where you are. So for example, if you have a team that likes to go out for drinks or dinner after work, and some individuals just really, it takes all of their energy to be able to function during the day and they need to go home and decompress, accepting that is that individual's need is something that can help them feel welcomed and comfortable at work. So those are just a few things beyond the typical, understanding what a worker or employee needs to thrive in a job, whether it's very clear steps, very clear deadlines, whether it's working on their own or working in a team. So really, again, understanding who the person is and meeting them where they are and helping to set them up in an environment where they thrive. I mean, quite frankly, I would encourage that for any employee, but it's particularly important for those who are neurodivergent.
Thank you, Brenna. Now, Brenna gave a pretty good list of things that employers could do to improve the situation, but I'm going to ask you to append that list a little bit. Are there other steps that employers can take to diffuse these minefields to success and level the playing field for neurodivergent employees?
I think Brenna really touched upon quite a number of them. One of the ones that I can add to that and really think about is the universal design. Taking a look at in today's remote world of operation, how we operate remotely, it becomes critically important that we are being mindful and understand that some people may or may not want to get on cameras. they're comfortable, they're not comfortable. But the remote world of work has certainly removed the barriers for many individuals that are on the neurodiverse spectrum, because they're able to work in the comfort of their own environment, where they might be sensitive to light or some of the sound surroundings. But really taking a look at how managers and are the leaders of the organizations today are really taking an empathetical approach. And truly, it is critically important that whatever you do, whatever you decide that you've learned about any individual that is a neurodiverse or person with disability, you will find that that is applicable across the board for any of your workforce, and that can be beneficial to any of the individuals that you're working with. To me, I personally feel like this becomes like a training ground for the leaders on how they can be better leaders in the world of work today.
All right. Dr. Williams, are you seeing any evidence that companies are more and more willing to make the structural, organizational, and philosophical changes needed to make sure that neurodivergent employees succeed on the job?
I am. I broadly, one of the challenges that I see, and I think this is something a lot of the other individuals on the panel today will agree with, is I'd love to see it across more industries. One of the challenges that we've had with the neurodiversity initiatives and employer roundtables and all these great things is they're very industry specific. It's finance, technology, data analytics. It's very, very tight, very specific industries, large industries. Don't get me wrong, and great opportunities, absolutely. But I think I would love to see more of these initiatives in other types of industries. And in fact, my staff and I have talked about what other industries could be great targets to look at or employers to talk to that could really offer opportunities to our students. And there's so many. So I think that's a piece I'd like to see more of, is the widening of the types of industries. The other piece I think that's important too is acknowledging that neurodiversity is in of itself a spectrum as well, and how those individuals present. It's not just about folks on the spectrum and individuals with autism spectrum disorders. It's a much wider range than that. So I think widening that range, but also widening the industries that we're working with, and the industries that are making those changes, is just as important.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. Jillica, this conversation has reminded me of the infamous bank robber, Willie Sutton, who, when asked why he robbed banks, famously answered, because that's where the money is. And I'm wondering whether that's a good philosophy for recruiters and employers when it comes to neurodivergent candidates, that they should go to the colleges that are graduating these students, that they should go to platforms like Mentra that are bringing these job candidates together and putting them on display. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, I do think so. I think companies are learning that in order to crack the code, they should be working directly with people with lived experience, as well as subject matter experts. So whether that's your disability services office in the university, whether that's the job coach that has worked for 5 years with the individual to really match them with a successful career, whether that's all of the supports that exist in the ecosystem today for neurodivergent individuals. I think that barrier that exists today has to be bridged. And I do truly believe that, those factors that we consider, as mentioned earlier, whether that's, someone has sensitivity to certain lights or smells or, different sensory processing needs, all of those things to really understand and accommodate can really make or break a good job fit, in addition to someone's technical skills, hard skills, soft skills. So for the neurodivergent community, understanding that can really change lives. And I think companies are working with, as well as tools like Rangam, to really have the training and really understand how can we approach neurodiversity hiring and train millions of people across different organizations to change their mindset, and then use tools like Mentra to assess and figure out, okay, how do we build an inclusive process that's sourcing, assessing, as we mentioned earlier, not screening out people, but looking at alternative and non-traditional forms of strengths and skills that can be displayed through boot camps or, for folks who didn't go to college, maybe personal projects. I love the approach that was mentioned earlier, sort of show, don't tell approach. I think that's really powerful for this community. And I'm really excited about what the future holds.
All right, well, we've come to the last question, and this one is for all of you. I'd like to hear from each of you. What advice do you have for parents who have neurodiverse children who will soon be on the runway headed into the employment field, or those who are ready to stand in line right now looking for work? And I guess we'll start with Brenna.
It's a great question, and one I've personally been puzzling over myself quite a bit lately as a parent of neurodiverse children. I think it's a couple of things. It's always a couple of things with me, but I think it's a couple of things. The first is to help them understand that neurodiversity is part of who they are. It's no different than having brown eyes or being a lefty or being good at math or being good at languages. This is who you are. This is you process the world in a different way. And that can be as much a strength as it is a challenge. And you have something unique that you can bring to the world. I think the other thing I would say is the area that interests you the most is the area where you can make the most impact. So focus on the areas where you know that you have a specific talent or a specific deep interest that you can bring something to an organization. Don't get mired in, a lot of the other concerns. Focus on what you're good at, and that's what I would say.
And Hetal?
Yeah, I believe that today there's so many different organizations that are focused around this. So for the future, there's going to be some incredible platforms that's going to evolve and they're going to get innovated. But for the parents, I would say is just to keep a trust factor in their children. What we often see today is sometimes the individual might be quite capable, might be interested, but oftentimes, parents have a little bit of a fear factor of them getting hurt or putting them out there in the real world. That piece of it all is always very difficult, I think, for any parents, for any children. But really trusting your child and knowing that they will be perfectly fine, and identifying those organizations where they will flourish and that they will fit in within the culture. And that's going to be the biggest key for the parents, is knowing what's out there and identifying that for their children.
Thank you. Dr. Williams.
I would speak from a different I'll speak from a different perspective in terms of the college, and what I see as well is an individual has to want to work. And I know that seems very, very basic, but I work with a lot of different individuals with neurodiversity, disability, you name it, and some of them aren't there yet. They're not ready to go into that work journey, or maybe they are, but only in a very limited way. And so I think we have to acknowledge that not everybody is ready for a full-time 40-hour-a-week corporate job. They're just not. So I think, but acknowledging that, so they have to want to work, yes. They have to be ready to work, absolutely. Then a third piece is they have to be willing to do the work to work. And a great example I give of that is we talk with parents sometimes, and they say, hey, my son, can you help my son or daughter get a job? And my staff will say, absolutely. What can we do? Well, we're available this time. Reach out to us, whatever. We reach out to the individual, we don't hear back. We reach out to the individual, don't hear back. We reach out to the individual, don't hear back. And the parents say, well, why don't they have a job? And we say, well, ask them. And so I think we have to also acknowledge that it's not just up to employers. And I think this is something folks in HR and people who have been hiring for the years like us understand, but it's not just up to HR or even these companies to reach neurodivergent individuals. That's part of it. It's also up to these neurodivergent individuals to reach these companies and to say, I want an opportunity with you. I'm willing to do the work that a neurotypical individual is willing to do, and more, many times more, that they're willing to do to attain that opportunity. It's a lot of effort to get a job for anybody, regardless of diversity. So I think that's a really big piece we don't want to underestimate.
All right. Well, Jillica, you have the last word.
Yeah, I mean, I'm personally the sister of a non-speaking autistic individual. And I think for so long, I sort of always thought, maybe my brother is intelligent. Maybe he does have his own strengths that he can bring. And I think, from my parents' perspective, it was so it was a lot more focused on sort of what my brother sometimes could not, what he could not perform. And I think if I were to, go back in time and sort of say, mom and dad, what you could do differently, I would say, to focus in on what those strengths are, what my brother could do well, and sort of and focus on that and really talk about that more. I think today it's difficult to communicate, especially across different cultures. There's so many stigmas involved with neurodiversity, and communicating and expressing, what you need from an employer, what you need even from your own family. That can be so helpful. Growing up and getting older and sort of going into the workforce and expressing what it is you need, whether in an interview or once you get the job, or what you need from a team. Sometimes a lot of masking happens because there's just no way to share. It's hard to find the words sometimes. And so I would say for parents, practicing that even at the dinner table, not talking about it like it's a weakness, but really changing the perspective and seeing it as a strength, I think can really enable more transparent conversations across all different environments and across cultures as well.
Well, we're going to have to leave this very compelling conversation right there. Brenna Sniderman, Hetal Parikh, Dr. James Williams, Angelica Kumar, thanks for the knowledge.